I think I'll start with the basics. We are taking up legal positivism, a philosopher here who's very important within the discussion of legal positivism, and it is Hans Kelsen. And we discussed the basics already. He's talking about kind of pure theory of law, okay, law which is not adulterated by certain other extraneous considerations like we should keep this idea of law separate from other facts, okay, and we should other facts, okay, and then we also separate law from that of morality. Now why he does that, we had a basic discussion about that, okay, that within the positivists, okay, so you see his approach is different. You see lots of similarities between his work and that of H.L.A. Hart. There's a lot of similarity between their work. But prior to them, the other positivists that we studied, Kelsen, Austin and Bentham, they were positivist in nature. And why were they so? Because, in Britain, they were British philosophers, and British philosophers, Britishers were influenced by this idea of empiricism, okay. They were concerned more with the factual world, okay. So their approach to defining law was also factual. So in contrast to that, there's this other way of defining law, okay, not based on facts. We are not concerned about the factual world. Yes, it is important for us, but at the level of defining the law, we do not concern ourselves with the factual world. We define law in terms of some kind of norm, okay. Law talks to you in the form of some kind of norm, okay. It is norm when it expects you to behave in a certain way. It says that you ought not to steal, you ought not to kill, you ought to pay your taxes, etc., etc., okay. Law talks in that language, okay. Now it is important, okay, because the facts, okay, the factual world and the normative world are quite different, okay. The facts exist in the physical world, okay, and norm exists in the world of ideas, okay, in the normative world. So that's what I was trying to tell you guys, that in the world of facts you see causation, okay. And how do we describe an event that occurs? Well, there is one event which is preceded by another event, and the two events are related by something called causality, that one event causes another, okay. So one act causes another act, okay. That's the event that we are referring to. So there's this idea of causality in the factual world. Now we can take the question of causality to another extent, as Hume is talking about. Time will not just allow us to do that. But anyway, unlike that, okay, unlike what you see in the physical world, that one thing is caused by another, okay. In the normative world, we do not use the word causation. We use the word imputation, that one norm is imputed by another, okay. So what is the difference? Okay, difference is not merely in terms of words, okay. It's not just different words that we are using here. They also convey different kind of ideas. So you see that if I push this, then it moves, okay. So you can say that my act of pushing caused the moving, okay. So external force applied, and then that led to the bottle moving, okay. So you can say that, well, that's the act of causation there, okay. But norms do not behave like that, okay. So there could be many different norms, okay. So norms exist in their subjective sense, in the sense that you will have many different norms. Then which one is a valid norm among these different norms, okay? Which one are the valid norms, okay? Your answer will be the one which is imputed by another norm, another higher norm, not superior but higher norm. Now, what do I mean by that? We do not say that the higher norm is causing that lower norm. No, the lower norm is validated by the higher norm, okay. So that's the difference, okay. In causation, there is this creation of another act, okay, because of the previous act, okay. So that one act leads to the subsequent act, okay, subsequent event, okay. Whereas in case of norms, it's not like that. One norm is validated by another higher norm. So that's essentially the difference between the facts on the one hand and norms on the other. So yes, norms usually talk to you in the sense of an ought. Okay, it's very important that Kelsen talks in terms of ought, because despite the existence of laws, okay, there are people who escape the grip of the law, who are successfully able to escape from the law. The reason that they're able to escape from the law does not mean that the law does not exist. Well, that will be the conclusion that you will arrive at. Kelsen would say, if you are a fact positivist, and whether there is a law or whether there is an obligation will purely be a factual answer. Okay, so if someone escapes successfully from the application of the law, then you can say that, well, there is no law, and that's the extreme which it is said that the legal realists take it to. So the idea of prediction based on probabilities, as was propounded by Bentham, that we studied earlier. So that's the problem with factual, fact positivism. Well, here our philosopher Kelsen gives you normative positivism, which says that law, talks in terms of some kind of ought. Although when you read a particular provision of law, it does not say that you ought not to kill, you ought not to commit murder. We'll look at that. But then when you interpret it, you get a norm that says that you ought not to murder, or you ought not to steal, or you ought not to rape, or you ought not to assault, etc., etc. So that's the idea. So yeah, the idea is that here one norm is validated by another norm. Okay, so that's what we are going to look at. So yes,
Sir, I
yes,
have a
yes,
doubt.
yes, tell me.
Sir, you mentioned earlier that lower norms are validated by the higher norms.
Yeah.
So, but then how will the higher norms be validated?
They will be validated by another higher norm.
So the cycle will continue like that.
Yeah, so we are going to discuss that in a while. I tried to explain this thing to you guys, but I was exhausted. I don't know if I made sense yesterday. That the same problem that you are noticing here also exists in the factual world. Okay, in the factual world, you can say that an event that occurs here, right now, okay, is always preceded by another event, okay, which is preceded by another event, which is preceded by another event. So that's the causality, okay, one event leading to the another event. So that's the causality that we see, okay, and it's moving in one direction because we are limited by our understanding, and time seems to move forward. Okay, so because of this forward movement of time, we see causality, that it seems that one act is causing the other. We do not know what is there in the future. We do not remember the future. Okay, because of that, we think that, well, one act causes another. Okay, so yes, it's there. Okay, it seems to be the case. So we do not know what is there in the future, but we can, with observation, okay, if we had the best telescopes out there, you can just look back, probably 13, 14 billion years, light years, billion years back, okay, and then what do you see? You see, cosmic, microwave background, and then you can, you don't see much beyond, but you can use mathematical, formulations to postulate that everything was, extremely compact at one single point known as primeval event, primeval atom, and then Big Bang happens, and then everything expands and all that nonsense. Okay, not nonsense, very important for me because I'm not an expert in all that. Yeah, so my brain is not able to comprehend, but I hope I'm able to comprehend. I'm able to explain the basic idea here, that you go back and then ultimately you have to come to this point where where it all began. Okay, so let's assume that it was with that primeval atom and then Big Bang happened. Okay, now one might ask, what happened before that? Okay, how can something come from nothing? Okay, so one might say that, well, something must have caused it. Okay, now again you will ask the same question, well, what caused that cause? Okay, what caused the cause? Okay, the first cause. Okay, you have to take it to be given. Okay, but then like physics is coming up with many different explanations of that phenomenon, that you do not have to take it as given. Okay, it is possible for something to come out of nothing, that there are some kind of fluctuations that might lead to, I mean, you have this many different worlds which can exist, and all those hypotheses are there. And then you also have hypotheses like, well, it has been there since forever, that the factual world is there since forever. So it does not begin at one point of time, but it has always been there, expanding, contracting. Okay, so that's what you see in the factual world. Okay, now the religious people, what they say, that because uh, uh, just a second, I'll address your question as well. Now, religious people would say that, well, this is what the scientists are not able to explain, that what caused everything else. Okay, so there has to be a cause which, itself has not been caused by anything, and that has to be God. Okay, so this is something, if you remember, even when we discussed Thomas Aquinas. Okay, we discussed this idea when we were talking about Thomas Aquinas. Okay, that's the reason that they provide for God. Okay, but scientists say otherwise. Okay, they say that we do not know, rather than saying that because we don't know, it has to be God. Okay, so yes, Adarsh, your question is, so anything which does not arise of a cause is said to be given. Yeah, this is, so God is taken to be given. Okay, you have to start with it. If you do not, then everything else will fall apart. Okay, so you have to take it as given, whereas the scientists do not do so. Okay, they do not take anything to be given. There is always a way of trying to understand, okay, how it all happened. But then the thing is that what we are talking about right now is in the factual world. Okay, so our pure theorist here, pure theory of law, he also has a similar explanation of this same phenomenon, but in the legal world, in the normative, legal world. As Jairaj was pointing out, that you have one norm which is which is validated by, imputed by another norm. That norm is imputed by another norm. That norm is imputed by another norm, and ultimately you come to one norm. Okay, one that is the highest norm, known as the grand norm, and that's the norm that you have to take as given, as Adarsh is talking about. Yeah.
Sir, can you repeat that norm? Gun norm.
Grand norm.
Sir, but you said like the given things are just based in the factual world.
Yeah.
So, sir, how did you relate with the normative world?
No, see,
where the norm is given?
The thought process is the same. Okay, the thought process is the same, but we are talking about two different worlds. Okay, so if you think about the factual world, let's say that it all started at the very beginning. Okay, in the beginning. Okay, as it says in the Bible. Okay, in the very beginning. Okay, so it starts with that primeval atom. But you can ask the question, okay, where did that primeval atom come from? Okay, well, what explanation can we have? We have other explanations, that I do not have the expertise to explain, but there are enough theories related to that. Okay, but then one would also ask, what caused that to happen? Okay, either there is something or there is nothing. Okay, so how could something come from nothing? Okay, it cannot happen unless there is something that causes something to come from nothing. But then when someone says that, one says that, well, you have to take the existence of that something that creates everything out of nothing as given. Okay, and that's the idea of God, whereas the other scientists say that we do not know. Now, why am I talking about this? Because it is also important in the normative world. Okay, now here's the thing. Okay, just the way the religious talk about justification for God, in a similar way, our philosopher here, that is Kelsen, is talking about the existence of grand norm, that you have to take the grand norm as given, because if you do not take it as given, you do not consider it to be given, then the rest of the legal system, that legal order that we are talking about, it falls apart. Okay, so you either accept it or you do not accept it. Okay, but here's the thing. Okay, although he talks about separation of the factual world from the normative world, at the level of grand norm, we see some kind of connection between the factual world and the normative world. Okay, what is that? Whether the legal system exists or not will not depend on efficacy of one norm or the other. Okay, because the lower norms, and their validity depends not on how efficacious they are, but on them being valid in accordance with another superior norm. Okay, not superior, higher norm. Okay, but what about the grand norm? There's nothing that validates the grand norm. So when it comes to grand norm, whether the question of validity does not even arise here. You either accept it or you do not accept it. Okay, now how do we know that it exists or it does not exist? Well, that's a factual reality, isn't it? Whether most of the people consider it as a grand norm or not. So you see the relation between efficacy and validity there. We will discuss this when the appropriate time comes within this topic. But I hope you understood that if you do not take the grand norm as given, the rest of the system falls apart. Okay, so that's what holds it all together. And if you do not have that, you just have free floating subjective norms, then can we really call it a law? Can we really call it a legal system? Those will just be subjective opinions, subjective choices. So that's the problem you see with mixing law with morality that we started with, if you remember. One more question. So are the normative world and the factual world anyhow connected? So yeah, see, the thing is, for me, if you were to ask me this question, I would say that, well, if your factual world does not exist, would the normative world still exist? And so I don't think so. It will not exist. Nor does Kelsen say that, well, there is no, connection whatsoever. He's just accepting that Humean position that you cannot derive an ought from an is. Okay, so oughts have their own world, and is, the factual world has its own world. But then they're nonetheless connected in a certain way, because norms, okay, norms are interpretation of what happens in the factual world. They are not derived from the facts themselves, but they are you find them by giving certain meaning to what happens in the factual world. So that's the thin connection that Kelsen establishes between facts on the one hand and norms on the other. And if you were to ask me, I would say these are a kind of wordplay that we are doing, but important nonetheless, because they have certain kind of utility. But my justification here is utilitarian. Okay, not that I subscribe to the ideas that are being talked about. Because if you remember, I had shared this idea with you guys already that there is no. This is-ought distinction is not of much use to us, and it does not make much sense to say that you cannot derive an ought from an is. And I had shared a long video with you guys, if you remember. So go back to watching that video once again. What kind of connection exists between the factual world and the normative world? Okay, because the norms, the oughts, can be interpreted in terms of facts. So anyway, but our philosopher is saying that, well, they are in a different world. Okay, so fact exists in the world of things. Okay, and norms exist in the world of ideas. Now here's the thing. Okay, can there be a world of idea independent of a factual world? Well, we are going to discuss that now. So yes. So we discussed that ultimately, as was pointed out by Jairaj, that yes, the validity here of a lower norm is imputed by a superior, higher norm. I shouldn't say superior, because superior conveys substantive superiority. It's not that. Okay, we are not talking in terms of substance here. It's merely that there is a higher norm. Okay, and ultimately, go ahead.
But how do we get to know what is higher norm and which one is lower norm?
Oh, well, that's very simple. We'll take up examples that will tell you. Okay, and just wait for a while. We will know. So let me tell you this. Okay, you know that laws made by state legislatures in India are inferior to the laws made, for example, by the parliament.
Yes, sir.
If you read 246, Article 246, 7th schedule, okay, you see it there, don't you? Then ultimately all the laws are subject to the constitutional requirements of them being in accordance with, not against what is there in part 3 of the constitution. So your the rights, the laws which are legislated, they cannot be in violation of your fundamental rights. So that's there. So you see there's a hierarchy of norms here. Now, for example, law which is made by your municipal authority, will that be able to supersede the laws made by, for example, the state legislatures, or for example, the laws which are made by the union parliament? They cannot, because they are lower in that order. Got the idea?
Yes, sir.
Huh?
Yes, sir.
So it's not that difficult to trace, where in that ladder, different norms exist. Okay, it's very simple. Even with respect to, precedents as a source of law, it's quite clear, isn't it? Laws made by the high courts, okay, the precedents which are laid down at the level of high courts, they will not supersede the precedents which are laid down by the Supreme Court. And then you see that smaller bench will not be able to supersede the larger bench. So there is always a hierarchy of norms. I hope that's clear.
Yes, sir.
So ultimately you trace it to one norm, okay, that he calls as basic norm, okay, also known as grand norm, okay, that's the word that we used earlier, okay. And you trace the validity of all other objective norms, okay, objectively valid norms, from that one grand norm, okay. So yeah, that's, Kelsen's discussion ends right there, okay. But it's, you understood what Kelsen is saying. That's the end of the entire discussion. But then that's just, if you're smart enough, then you will be able to trace everything else that he's going to talk about from this discussion that we just had. But it is nonetheless necessary that we know in little more detail what he is trying to talk about, okay. But just remember, like all other positivists, even when he's talking in terms of norms, okay, he's not talking about moral norms but legal norms, okay. Whether that is possible or not, we will see in the discussions subsequently. Now, why does he think in the way that he does, okay? That's because he was influenced by a particular philosophical approach, okay? The philosophical approach that was developed by Immanuel Kant, known as transcendental idealism, okay? Now this is a kind of a priori way of thinking, okay. Now what is a priori? Okay, a priori is basically the knowledge, okay, that you do not gain from experience, okay. The knowledge that you do not gain from experience, okay. They are just they are knowledge independent of your experience, okay. So this is quite simple. We had enough discussions of all this, okay. But a priori knowledge, so for example, the sun is warm, okay, you know that, okay, because you have experienced it, okay, you have experienced it, okay. But there are other kinds of knowledge which you do not have to experience. It's just there, okay. So for example, a triangle has 3 sides, okay. Do you need to experience different kinds of triangles to then conclude that yes, triangles have 3 sides? You do not have to. It's just something that you have, that is like in itself, the concept in itself exists, okay. It doesn't, you cannot possibly by experiencing many different triangles have the possibility of concluding them, then yes, there could be triangle that has 4 sides. It just does not make sense, okay. You have to take it as given. Similarly, logic, okay, there is no way logic can be proved, okay. It just is there, okay. It just is there, okay. You have to take it as given, okay. So that's the kind of approach that was developed by Immanuel Kant, okay. So his essential idea here in transcendental idealism was as opposed to empiricism, okay. Empiricism we discussed earlier already, okay. That believes that, well, your mind is a blank slate, okay, and no knowledge is innate, okay, and every knowledge is based on what you experience through your sensory perceptions, okay. Now you remember some took it to the extremes, okay. whereas in the works of Hume you see some kind of skepticism, okay, of whether the reality exists independent of perception, okay. You see some kind of skepticism. But in the works of George Berkeley, you see that, well, they take it to extremes, okay, where they say that nothing really exists, independent of our perception, okay. So essayist percipi, okay, is the maxim here, that nothing really exists, okay, except what is perceived, okay. But as you know, that's not what yeah, philosophically it makes sense to say so, because whatever you observe, the colors, the interactions that you are having with me, or maybe I'm having with you, and I'm feeling that, well, I'm having this chat with real people, that you are there, okay. But how the hell am I supposed to know? Maybe this is just a thought process going on there, okay. Maybe it's just a perception that I'm getting, okay. What proof can I provide to say that, well, you guys actually exist, or these colors, this this sensation of air on my face, this smell actually exist? Do they actually exist independent of what I'm perceiving? Okay, so you see it, there is a possibility of taking it to that extreme, that the only reality is what you perceive, okay. Now Kant is not one of those philosophers, okay. Kant is Immanuel Kant does not say that, well, the actual world does not exist, okay. The actual world also exists, okay, but what we perceive is not the actual world, okay. It is always affected by something else, okay. So if you remember in the other class, in the previous class, we talked about how he talks about noumena and then phenomena, okay. So noumenal world is the world that actually is, okay, what it is, okay. But there is no way for us to, with complete certainty, know that, well, that's the world as it is. You will never know. You will know what you perceive of the world as it is, okay. You only have a perception, okay, an impression of the world as it is, okay. Now here's the thing, okay. Now what you perceive is always affected by something that exists in between. And what is that? It is, he's saying that when you perceive the world, your brain already has this a priori ideas like space and time, okay. Space and time, okay, that's something that is already there in your brain, okay. And because of those concepts which already exist in your brain, you are able to perceive the world in a certain way, okay. So this is the position that was held by Immanuel Kant. As opposed to him, Hume would say that, well, we perceive time and space because we are perceiving the world, okay. Because we are perceiving the world, we come to conclusions about these concepts known as, categories known as time and space. Quite opposite to that, our philosopher here, Immanuel Kant, says that, well, you are able to make sense of the world because you already have this innate categories of space and time. He talks about other categories as well. Those are not that important. These two are very important, okay. Now this is very important for us, okay. So from here he comes to this idea of transcendental idealism, okay. Talks about a world of ideas, okay, that's independent of your experiences, okay. And at the same time, Immanuel Kant also accepts another idea which was propounded by Hume, that you cannot jump from the world of is to the world of ought, okay, in the moral sense of the term, or other sense of the term, okay, if at all, but I understand it in the moral sense of the term. But here Kelsen took it in a completely different way, as you see, okay. But anyway, Hume says that you cannot jump from the world of is to the world of ought, okay. They are separate. This is something which is also accepted by Immanuel Kant, that yes, you obviously cannot jump from the world of is to the world of ought. So these two things, the transcendental, idea of transcendentalness, okay, the idea of a priori, okay, pre-existing knowledge, okay, along with the other idea of you not being able to jump from the world of ease to the world of ought. Okay, these ideas ultimately affected the philosophical thinking of Kelsen, and accordingly he came up with his pure theory of law based on this inspiration that he drew from this idea of transcendental idealism, which was essentially the work of our philosopher, the other philosopher, that is Immanuel Kant. Okay, now as you will see from here on, this is the constant presence. Okay, this is the constant philosophical position which is present in Kelsen's work throughout in his pure theory of law. So both this idea that there is a world of things, okay, noumena, that's different, and then that there is a world of ideas, okay, phenomena, they are separate, and then there is a what is and what ought are different. Okay, you cannot come to ought conclusion from ease. Okay, so yeah, that's so. I have one more question. Oh no questions, that's it. So I hope I was able to make sense of this. I'm trying to simplify this philosophy because it will take one whole week to merely struggle with this philosophy. Because if you want to study Kant, then you have to look at not just these two a priori or a posteriori distinction, but he's also making this distinction between analytical and synthetic, and then it leads to 4 different kinds of combinations, and it's very complicated. So it's not necessary at this stage, but I hope the basics are clear with you that he is making this distinction between a world of things, okay, as they exist, noumena, then there is this world of ideas known as phenomena, then there is something called what is, and there is something called what ought to be done. Okay, and you cannot come to conclusions about what ought to be done based on two is premises. Okay, you cannot come to an ought conclusion. So this is the thing which inspired our philosopher Hans Kelsen. So is it clear till now?
Does Hans Kelsen's the theory of pure law goes in phase to the Rashbach's formula? Because
goes what was
because
your goes against, you said?
Rashbach's formula.
So what did you say? It is in accordance with, or it goes against?
No. It goes against. It goes against.
How? Why do you think so?
Because in the Rashbach formula there is like you ought to not follow the law if it is if it does a grave injustice.
Yes.
While the Han Kelsen here gives out a very different opinion that you cannot compare what you ought to do and what you should be doing.
No. So here's the thing. Okay, it's not really that one. Okay, let me tell you. You are correct in saying that obviously they are not thinking alike. Obviously not. Why? Because the other philosopher, Redbruck, in his Redbruck doctrine or Redbruck formula, as you call it, he's saying that law should not cross certain limits of immorality. If it crosses that limit, then it is not worthy of being called law at all. So he's saying that there is some connection between law and morality. Okay, that threshold limit.
Yes,
that he.
Yes, sir.
On the other hand, our other philosopher Hans Kelsen is saying that there is no necessary connection between law and morality. Okay, but
yes,
the idea.
he
is just like just like H.L.A. Hart. He's also saying that we are not saying that moral norms and legal norms do not overlap. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. We are saying that the validity of legal norm will not be because it is in accordance with certain moral proposition, but because it is imputed by another higher norm, okay, which is a legal norm, not a moral norm. Okay, it could again then overlap with a moral norm, but its validity again is to be traced from the fact that it has been imputed by a higher norm. Okay, that higher norm is again imputed by another higher norm. That says positivism. So obviously they are at odds on this particular point. Okay, that we should not confuse the law, okay, with that of morality. The only difference being this, that here our philosopher is not talking in terms of merely is. Okay, law is not merely an is, it is also an ought, but it is not a moral ought. It's some other kind of ought. How is it a different kind of ought than a moral ought? Well, he's going to explain in a while. So I hope you guys are with me till now. Is that fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So let's look at then. Yeah, let's look at this idea of law as a norm. Okay, so he says that law is a kind of norm. Okay, but then law exists in the physical world. Okay, who would deny that? If you find a law book, well, you can say that, well, law exists in the physical world. Okay, I can open IPC and then I can find section 300 that defines murder, and then 302 punishment relating to murder. Well, it exists in the physical world. Then what the hell is what the hell is Kelsen talking about? Okay, why does he say that law is a norm? Okay, so here's how we are to make the difference. Okay, so that's the connection that exists, that we cannot get rid of, that whether a normative world is possible if the physical world did not exist. Well, I believe that it's just not possible. Okay, so he says that the physical acts that give rise to law, okay, so for example, how the law is passed, okay, how a judgment is given, okay, belong in the world of facts. Okay, so yes, the law book exists. Okay, the judges have given a particular decision. Well, the statute has been passed. Okay, these are all facts. I'm giving you a description of what can be seen, what can be perceived. Okay, so why? Because they occur in the world of space and time. Okay, and we perceive them with our senses. You see the judgment being given, you can find that in the law report. Okay, or you can find the statute in the law books. Okay, so you can find that in the factual world, but that's the world, that's the nominal world. Okay, or that's the world as it is. Okay, but that's not it. Okay, so it's written there in the book. Okay, it's written there in the book that says that, well, you shall not commit murder. I'm just simplifying, that's not the exact word. Well, let's look at what the exact word is. So yes, IPC defines murder like this. Okay, except in the cases hereinafter accepted, culpable homicide is murder if the act by which the death is caused is done with the intention of causing death, or, I mean, it's a huge definition, I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but you see that nowhere do you find the word ought here. It's just not there. Okay, the word ought is not there. Okay, so it's, if you are like a detached person reading that, you will see that. Okay, detached person, I'm saying, that's important. You're reading this, you see, well, this is merely a fact. Okay, that this is what is there, written there. Okay, yes, but then that's not the end of it. Okay, there's something more. Okay, see, it's written there. Okay, but it also at the same time can be interpreted in the normative sense of the term. Okay, the meaning that you derive from what you find written there. Okay, so it further says that the question of whether these acts represent legal norm, okay, that of parliament making law, okay, or judges delivering a judgment, okay, and ought cannot be answered simply by observing the fact. Okay, it requires mental inquiry about what the facts mean in normative sense. Okay, so you have to give an interpretation to what is there in terms of fact, and then you get the norm. Okay, so that's the connection. Now here's the thing. Okay, no matter how hard they try, they cannot say that, well, the norm will exist even if the facts didn't exist. But just that the meaning that you get of the law, okay, does not exist in the world of facts. It exists in the world of in the world of norms. Okay, the idea of transcendental idealism as Kant is talking about. So to me, it seems to be word salad. Okay, like some kind of I don't know. I do not have good words for this. But anyway, I hope you understood. Yes, there is something very profound here which is being said. Okay. Yeah, IPC defines, okay, what is murder. Okay. It does not say that you ought not to commit murder. But we understand that because, this particular provision of law says so, I ought not to commit murder. So that no, so see, I made a mistake here, so I hope you understood. When I said because, okay, then I'm saying that the norm that I'm talking about here is caused by this particular particular provision of law, but it is not caused by it. It's an interpretation of that particular provision of law. So that's the fact. Okay. Yeah, it's a lot of words, a lot, but yeah. Uh, but I hope you understood what they're talking about. That's what philosophy does. Okay. So yeah, I hope I made sense of what our philosopher is talking about here. Okay, so the difference here is this: that whereas your natural scientists are concerned with the natural world, your legal scientists are concerned with the normative world. Now the question that remains, that how is it possible for him to talk in terms of norm and at the same time say that, well, these norms are not moral oughts, they are just a different kind of ought? How the hell is that possible? So we will look at that in the subsequent classes. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to take a live class tomorrow because I'll be on leave, but I hope to complete Kelsen's topic, and the rest will be an even legal realism if it is possible. Uh, and sociological school will be uploaded this weekend. Do not worry, it's not that difficult a topic. But I will try and complete this topic